Welcome to Thinking Visually in Software Testing. Some of you will be thinking, where are all the pictures? We've just started, I can't see a picture, this is all about thinking visually. Well, there will be pictures, I will be doing pictures later on. But I want you to challenge the basic assumption that thinking visually means drawing pictures. Drawing pictures on paper, drawing pictures in tools. We're going to cover this in more detail later, but I want to challenge you to expand the way you think and to visualize your testing strategies and present them to people so that they can visualize and understand what you're doing. And it's important that we focus on the process of strategizing and thinking, using our imaginative and visual faculties to their fullest, rather than the output of the strategizing process as something which visually represents the strategy, i.e. a document. We need to focus on the process. My name is Richardson. I blog at eviltester.com. There's the mandatory Twitter tag at eviltester. So what's this all about? Well, fundamentally, this is all about using visual tools and techniques to aid your thought process, to make your thought process visual and to help you provide feedback to yourself and to aid the communication of your thought process to others. That's what I'm using visual to mean, the ability to see what people are doing and thinking and meaning, and to help people get the big picture and see what you're doing. Because I would rather see your thinking than see what you think your thinking should look like. And by this I mean, I want to see that you are thinking, that you are putting more effort into the thought process than you are into the documentation process that you believe is required to convince me to buy into it. Because I see too many people thinking about their test approach, but they're not really thinking about their test approach. They're thinking, how can I fill in this template? How can I pad out the time before I get my hands on the software? How can I get through the review process to allow me to get started? Thinking about what you're going to do and following the documentation processes in your organization are different things. If you don't think in the first place, if you don't have a model about what you're going to do, your communication will be unclear and you won't convince, regardless of how well you fill in the template. So let's start. Let's quickly go through an example and let's think about visually testing the Google search box and look at an ad hoc, whereby I mean for the specific purpose, case or situation at hand and for no other, an ad hoc approach that I took where I was thinking visually. Now everyone's seen the Google interface. I'm not going to show you a screenshot of it. I'm going to show you how I spent 5 minutes and visually modeled my thinking. So I sat down for a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, and thought about how I could test this web app, the Google web app. And this is my visual strategy. It's visual. Look, there's a picture and there are words. My handwriting is so unique that you might not be able to interpret those words. So you can see them as little scribbles and doodles and pictures. Now I'm claiming that this is a visual representation of the output of my thought process. It can act as an aid to my future thought processes as I test the application. And if I had to, I could communicate my thought process based on this visual model. So let's zoom in on this little part here highlighted at the top. Here, if you can't read my writing, don't worry. This is an illustration to support my verbal communication. When I go to google.com from the UK, I get redirected to google.co.uk. That seems like something I might want to test. How is it done? Is it based on my IP address? Is it based on HTTP headers that the browser sends? I don't know. But I'm thinking, can I demonstrate situations where this works? Can I exploit it and make it think that I'm somewhere that I'm not? And zooming in on the main search box, this is where most people would start. And you can see that I'm thinking that I can search by pressing return, by pressing tab and return when the search button is selected. I can search by clicking on the search button. And I was doing this in Firefox. And the particular version of Firefox I was using from the location that I was testing didn't show me the Ajax drop-down I was expecting. I got the browser historic entries drop-down. So I'm wondering what it is that triggers the Ajax to be there. And you can see that I've made some notes on the input scope. All I've written down are notes to thinking about the values and the length. And I would expand on this later in a text editor or mind map. because I'd want to start exploring categories and relationships in the test ideas that I come up with, and I'd find it faster to do that using a different tool. But here, I've got a visual representation of my high-level strategy and notes on it. I've also made notes that the request is going to the server. So I will want to have my test strategy encompass under the GUI messaging direct to the server. I'm thinking about automating at this level, performance testing at this level. There's a whole aspect of the strategy that is hidden beneath or within this visual representation that I'm going to have to decompose into further representations. But this small chunk is an illustration of a high-level thought. And as you can see, I've barely scratched the surface of this. There's enough information here that I could keep myself busy for a day. But if I had to communicate my strategy to someone quickly, I could do that based on this visual representation. And this is good enough for me to continue to think about, step back and see the big picture and how things connect, and to communicate. And I used ad hoc tools to do this. I used pen and paper and scanned it into my computer. And now that I've got a camera on my phone, that's great. I can take photos of my notes and whiteboards. I have Evernote on my phone so that I can sync those pictures into Evernote and access them on my computer and edit them and print them out. And this is pretty low tech. I mean, I suggest you examine the tools you already have, because a lot of the time when people consider thinking visually, they think about bigger and better tools, better diagrammers, better auto layout, better formatting from their mind map tool or diagrammer. I am trying to model my thought processes, and I'm such a simple thinker that I can use simple tools. My background is in formal modeling, and I still have a tendency to think about a technology solution and a single representation which I can derive other views from automatically. I still want that. Ultimately, I would love a tool that does that. That would be great. But I don't start from that perspective anymore. Previously, I would have, in the example you've seen, started with a mind map, and I would have created a GraphViz text file and automatically generate a diagram from there, written comments in the GraphViz file, and created a flow diagram for the state and the data flows using GraphViz, and built up a complicated mind map of all my thoughts. And I would have done that right from the start. I would have used technology tools sitting on the computer to do those things. I don't do that now. I'm now trying to think as simply as possible and model as flexibly as I can. And if you haven't experimented with those tools yet, then I encourage you to do so, because then you'll know where they can fit into your visual thinking approach. So what is this based on? Well, I've based this on my experience. I'm not basing this on psychology, I'm basing this on my experience. I've been driven by trying to get my documentation as small and valuable as possible. I want to have a process that supports self-reflection and self-feedback and editing. I'm basing this on reading systems thinking, where the books are filled with so many ad hoc representations of systems and flows and relationships and alternative categorizations of models. And I'm basing this on my previous and other people's utterly dreadful strategy and planning documentation. Documentation that does not attempt to communicate thinking, they attempt to fit a process or to get buy-in. And I even wrote a tool for maintaining lists and hierarchies and entities and flows and diagrams, because I wanted the one true tool that would help me do my thinking. And now I just use paper and pen because I've learned more about how I work, and I want to do that more effectively. I've learned to read quickly, to pillage documents for information, and I want visual communication to support me in my reading quickly. Uncle Al's helpful slogans. How little can you get away with? This is important. It's my guiding principle. How little can I get away with? Not how much can I pad this out. How quickly can I do this? How can I get the value out there as quickly as possible and then spend more time on it to maximize the value if and when required? Make the templates work for you rather than you working for the template. Put important information first so that if a manager accidentally walks into the room as you present the strategy, not realizing that he's wandering into a test strategy review meeting. And when they start backing away in horror, you want the important things first, fast and obvious, so that they have no choice but to have grasped your strategy within the 10 seconds that they were in that room for. And summarize for the reader. Meet the reader's needs. How many times have you read a summary that basically describes the title at the top of the page, says that this is a strategy for Project XY, when you already knew that because you saw the title before you read the document? You're reading the document because you want to know the test strategy for Project XY. You don't need the summary to tell you what document you're already reading. So meet the reader's needs, not what you think the reader wants to see. Sometimes that means challenging what the reader or what the person consuming this has already told you that they think they need. So I'm going to show you that I do this. I'm going to show you some real world examples. I'm not suggesting that these are great examples. These were done years ago. I only recently had to write a test strategy document again. I've managed to get away with about 3 years of creating models on wiki pages and communicating in person to other people these models rather than writing strategy documents. But even when these documents were written, I think they were written about 8 years ago, I was experimenting with different styles of communication. And I'm using these as examples because these were my first steps away from the word-heavy, formal, template-based documents. So I've redacted some of the things in here. I want you to view this as a picture. That's why it's kind of obscured. I just want you to kind of see the shape of the document, the style of things that are in there. You can see that I've used tables to illustrate data and outlines to organize around them. I'm using the headings to give a nice flow. There's a really concise distillation of a test data approach, which encourages a mental visual rendering of the data. You can see a state model and a flow of the data through that. This was ad hoc. It was as required for a specific need. It was not template driven. I was attempting to communicate as minimally as possible the model that I had created. And you can see that I started with a diagram. The diagram was my model. That is a standalone model that communicates my intent. Everything else is built on top of that to add further information. Here again, I started from a model diagram, and I pasted that into the document to explain more. And when I pasted it into the document, I created a box out to make some of the important things stand out. I've underlined text in there to draw people's attention. I've created numbered lists in order to organize things. This isn't great, but I'm attempting to pull out information and make the important parts stand out. And here, this is so small, you basically have to look at this document as a picture. I'm mixing diagrams and models and tables using different page orientations as appropriate. I'm even using the same diagrams in different places but with slightly different annotations to convey different parts of the model. I'm trying to communicate the thought processes and models as effectively as I can in as varied a way as is required to support the communication. So let's look at how not to think visually. Because I was taught how not to do this. You may have had a schooling like mine which taught us not to think and communicate visually. If you go through this list and the one on the next page, and you can read faster than I can talk about it. So if you have any of these beliefs, then shake them off now. I was taught that doodles are bad, that ad hoc representations of an idea are bad. It's not true. I was taught that I couldn't draw, and that is not true. Anyone can draw, but we don't practice. Modeling our thinking visually takes practice. Your first attempts will probably suck. Just keep going. I was taught that if I did it quickly, it wasn't good. That goodness takes time and detail, and if it was quick, you haven't put enough thought into it. That also is not true. We are really good at building the big picture quickly, and modeling this and communicating it quickly is an art. That's what we have to learn. We have to learn how to communicate what we're modeling and to transcribe our models as effectively as we can. And the school system just keeps giving, because I was also taught that we place value on the number of words and not the message, on the bigness and not the value. We were taught that big words are good, small words bad, that business communication was formal and used really complicated words. Have you seen documents that were filled with really complicated words when simple words were do? We were not taught that most business communication does not communicate, and that most business communication is bad communication. We need to keep things simple. I learned formal diagramming as part of computer science. It doesn't matter when I'm doing my diagramming now that I've just used circles and lines. So examine the things that you were taught. See if any of those things impact your ability to communicate, your ability to draw and model what you're doing. Remove any of those beliefs so that you can start doing things simply and in your style. I had to unlearn all that previous stuff and focus on value. Refocus from templates and on giving the person what they need. Focus on the time and effort it's taking so that you maximize the value of the process. I learned that communication is not what I give, it's what people take from what I present. So I have to help them take it in the way that I want them to focus in on the information that's important. Make your presentation novel so that you communicate the important points and support people's ability to remember. Design your communication in such a way that it's easy to read and easy to spot the gaps and to provide feedback. Not to swamp them with irrelevancy. Make whatever you do flexibly enough to support your thought processes as well as the communication process. And there will be more. There will be elements that you identify that are unique to you when you start thinking about thinking visually. So, it's important that you learn how to trap your thinking and your reading. So great ways to trap your reading yourself in the normal way of presenting your thinking. Big globs of text are great for hiding stuff in. Really smother the important points in an irrelevant forest of words. Don't format them in bold or anything to make the important bits stand out. Just swamp everything in big chunks of text. Having a summary that adds no value is a great way to convince your reader that your presentation is not worth reading or paying attention to. Unfortunately, many people have seen this so often that they are immune to this tactic now. So you may have to use other techniques here to stop your reader thinking. Template can really help increase the boredom factor. And if you have a lot of boilerplate text in the template, then people can easily skip over important information that you buried in there. It's a really good technique to apply when you're using the big block of text. And to make sure you hide things, don't use callouts or box outs or bold or italic. Don't indent paragraphs to help the flow, and don't try to design the document for readability. You want to be able to hide what's important. And you can see here that I'm using a list. Lists are great for stopping thinking. Give people a numbered list with 5 items and their brain thinks there's only 5 things. They won't look for number 6. They won't attempt to figure out what the scope is. Bullet lists are not quite as good as numbered lists. Numbered lists really limit your thinking. But unless you put text around the list to say e.g. and not limited to, people will stop thinking at just the stuff that you put in the list. Don't add questions in the list. That just encourages thought. Make sure you copy and paste from other documents. In your strategy, copy in a diagram from the architecture documentation, but don't reinterpret it from a test point of view. Take it out of context so people think, I've read that before. And if they do read it, then they don't see any value in this new document, so they may just stop reading the other parts of your document, assuming they're copy and pasted in from other places as well. I'm pretty sure that if you go through your own documents with a sense of humour, then you'll see plenty of relevant nonsense that adds no value. I mean, I saw plenty of stuff in my documentation that I had to learn how to change. And just in case you don't believe me, go find some examples on the web. Type in these searches into Google. I'll bring back some great examples. And by great examples, I mean truly dreadful documents that have all the previous traits. And these documents will have summaries which I don't even know what they summarize. Go through other people's examples, find them on the web, mock them mercilessly, and then come back to your documents and see the same mistakes. And that will help you build up some humility, and then you can more readily spot the mistakes when you make them. And you will make them. I still make these mistakes. It's important to try and knock them out of us. So some couple of quick tips. Al's favourite tips for shaking it up a bit. Start shaking up your thinking and do things differently. Use space differently. Examine what you do so that you do things differently, because anything that you do differently will force your brain to reevaluate what you're doing and how you're doing it. And you fundamentally want to change and adopt as many different thought processes and ways of modeling what you're doing as possible. And this is my non-psychology based view. Words are pictures. What you're seeing on your screen now is a picture. We use other pictures called letters and organize them in a formal way to make other pictures to represent our word concepts. And to help remind us that these are concepts, we reuse the same word to mean different things. And everything has a visual impact when processed visually. So format your documents and notes as if they were pictures where you're trying to convey information just from the layout. We think to build up models, and we use those models to communicate. Thinking is different. Thinking is for us, and we communicate for them. And different models have different purposes. So experiment with them and learn to use them to support you effectively. Now I have learned to read quickly. For a while I read a book a day. A book a day. And you have to redefine what reading means in order to read a book a day. I pillage books for value. I learned that most words are padding. I will look at the outline when I'm reading, table of contents, to see what is going on in the model that this book or document represents. I want to try and get a big picture view so that I can fill in the gaps where I think I need to. I focus on the images, the summaries, the callouts, because typically people use them to make important parts stand out. I'll read the first and last paragraphs and chapters in the assumption that you'll set the scene and draw conclusions. And I'll read your document backwards. And when I do that too, because I suspect your advanced stuff, the really juicy stuff, is in the back. And note the difference between illustrations and diagrams. Illustrations make things look nice and businessy. Diagrams add value in their own right. Figure out what helps you read quickly and then write in that way. And this is the slide that I thought I would start with. Obvious thinking tools first. Mind maps are great. I use them all the time. I use them as a memory aid, as a thinking tool, as a study aid, as an organizational outline tool. But they are terrible as a communication tool because they are so personal and they summarize at a high level. A good diagram is a great, concise representation of your thought model that stands alone and communicates your model. And do you use logs? I use logs. Logs are great. Logs are different from a linear document. Logs are a time-based model of your thought process. You can reorganize it and reshape it later to remove the time relationship, because the time relationship is important when collating, but not really for structuring. So I never want you to underestimate the value of a simple text editor and using that to help you think in a time-based way and to help you think spatially and more visually, even though it's pure text. Let's start thinking spatially. Here's what that single sheet diagram that we saw earlier looks like as a log. You can see I've numbered it in terms of the time that I added them. The time-based relationship was lost when I collated the information spatially as I did here. You can see that my thinking was different from the end result, which was a spatial collation model, and I can use this model here for communication. But keeping it on a single sheet is great for the big picture view, particularly with an ad hoc modeling approach. I also use mind maps for that big picture view because I can zoom in and out. I use space and text editors with indents and ad hoc annotation to help me collate and model my thinking before I transform it into another representation for exploring my thoughts more deeply. I use text editors a lot. I make notes all over the place on this text canvas, so don't rule out any tool for thinking visually. Any tool can support you in thinking visually if you start thinking it in terms of space and collation and reorganization. And this is the mind map that I used for this talk. It was great for structuring and thinking, but it really sucked for flow. I adjusted the flow when I moved it into the storyboard, into the presentation tool. And different tools support different styles of thinking, and you'll get different value as you model your thought process in the different tools. So here's a process you might use for thinking visually. Collate your basic thoughts. Structure it for the needs of the user or the next stage of your thinking. You may have to transcribe your collation into another tool or representation to do this. And the structure helps you think it through to get some sort of flow. Then transcribe it again to lay it out to support the use of the thoughts for the next stage in the thinking process, and communicate the most important thoughts visually. When you do this, visualize the outcome of what you want this communication to do. How do you want this to be used? That will change the visual model and the time you spend on it. And think about the person using it or consuming this model so you can meet their needs. And remember that that person might be you. Big pictures are great for zooming in and out, for chunking up to higher levels and decomposing into more detail. We may have to remodel and transform between models. So think about using lists for low-level detail, representing time in your model as flow or logs. Look at the attributes in the relationship. When you create a mind map, your default relationship is a parent-child decomposition, but there's other relationships in your model, and you may need different visual models to draw that out, or you may need to use tables or categories or different outlines in order to do that. Use space to make the important items visual and give you room to jump about and flow through the model. Use space to highlight the thing that's important. So now I'm going to spend the next 4 hours or so walking you through all these tools. Well, I'm not. You can do that because I've rammed a lot of stuff in to you over these 25 minutes. This is the mandatory tool list. We have to include a tool list. I have used all of these tools in one way or another. Build a list for yourself. Look at what you already use. You will be surprised at the number of tools you use, and you'll be surprised at how many different ways you can use them to support you. Categorize them for how you use them now. Think about what possibilities they offer. Look for alternatives to them, but never rule out the use of prosaic, day-to-day common tools like text editors or WinPrint screen to capture images. The aim is to support your thought process, not to find the most cutting-edge visual tool, because you already own the most cutting-edge visual thinking tool, and that is your brain. All you need are ways of supporting it. So I'm going to leave you with a suggestion. Think. You need to think. You must think. Don't think that you can get away without thinking. Make your thinking visible to you so that you know you've gone through a thought process and other people know that you've thought about the process and haven't just filled in a template. Communicate your thinking so that acts as a communication of what you think is important. And most importantly of all, do it your way. Own your modeling and your thought processes. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. My name is Alan Richardson. Be good.